Hope you guys are doing well. So today I have come with a new topic, that is what is Linux. So like a lot of you guys know what is Linux and know about its properties, but I'm just going to be discussing in detail about some things that you must know to use the Linux operating system. So we will start with the contents. So the contents, as you can see, are distributions, open source, the Linux shell, then root, capitalization, server versus desktop. We will discuss that topic as well, and finally we will know why should we use Linux rather than any other operating system. Basically, its importance. So I know a lot of us there are some people, it used to be me even, so I thought they think that Linux is very tough, and but it's actually pretty easy and a very safe operating system. It is not virus prone. So let's get started without any further ado. And also I will be only discussing the distributions in the open source today, because it's a very big topic and I can possibly cover that in one video. So now the rest of the topics I will be giving in the later videos, which will be coming very soon only. So now let's get started without any further ado. So before going on to the topics of distribution, open source, Linux shell, etc. Let's just first discuss what is Linux. Basically, what is Linux? So Linux is an operating system that acts as an intermediary or a bridge between the physical device and the instructional code of a program. So the main thing that you need to realize is that in Linux world, the software that you will be running is of a completely different type compared to the ones that you would run in the Windows operating system. Desktop applications like Microsoft Office and Adobe Photoshop are not usually run on a Linux environment. Linux normally runs servers database servers, web virtualization servers, etc. However, there are various Linux distributions out there that are specifically made for personal desktop computers. These Linux distributions are in a way similar to the Windows and Mac OS, in a sense that they run the same type of programs like the word processing programs, photo and video editing programs, web browsing applications, program development applications, games, and so on. These Linux distributions are more targeted to home users who just want a free operating system alternative. So I mentioned that Linux is an operating system, but Linux did not begin as an operating system. Linux was a kernel created by Linus Torvalds while he was a student. The kernel is essential, but by itself it is useless. It can only function in the context of a complete operating system. The Linux kernel was used in the combination with the GNU operating system. It is important to understand what a kernel is, as this is a defining point of Linux. A kernel is a central part of an operating system that is responsible for interfacing all your application down to the physical hardware. There are two major types of kernels competing in today's markets. So Windows and Unix-like kernels. The Linux kernel falls under the latter, as does BSD, Mac OS and Solaris. The term Unix-like refers to the fact that they operate similarly to or are based on the original Bell Labs Unix operating system. So I actually made a video on the history of Linux, so you guys can go and check that video out. I explained this Bell Labs Unix operating system and Unix and the creation of Linux more and history of Linus Torvalds more briefly. So I will be giving that on the I button on this video. So make sure to check that out as well. Kernels tend to fall under three categories: the microkernel, the monolithic and the hybrid. So first of all, coming to the microkernel, a microkernel only manages what it has to, CPU, memory, and IPC or inter-process communications. If it is not an IPC, memory or CPU, it is automatically regarded as an accessory and can be handled in user mode. Now coming to monolithic kernel. So monolithic kernels like Linux are the opposite of microkernels. They encompass not only the CPU, memory and the IPC but other things such as device drivers, file system management and system server calls. Now last but not the least, coming to the hybrid kernels. So the Windows kernel falls under the category of hybrid kernels because it has the ability to pick and choose what to run in both user and supervisor modes. So now finally coming to topic number 1, or the distributions. So after Linus Torvalds created Linux back in the 1990s, he wanted to stop working for a little bit. So what he did was make the source code for his new operating system completely available to the public. This allowed everybody in the world, especially computer geeks, scientists, etc., to start playing with and changing the Linux operating system as they saw fit. Major companies and educational institutions decided they liked Linux, and since Linux is an open source, they can see the source code. This gave them the ability to start creating their own versions. Now people from the University of California, Berkeley decided to start creating their own version of Linux. People from China also started creating their own version of Linux. People from all over the world, from all walks of life, started making their own versions of Linux that fit their own personal needs. Today you have Red Hat Linux, Ubuntu Linux and Google Android and Mint Linux and many more. Now it is much more important that you understand what you want your computer to do before you install the Linux operating system. With Microsoft Windows, you just install it first and then worry about what you want to do with your server later. With Linux, every distribution is built to do things in a certain way. For example, there is a version of Linux called Trustix. Trustix Linux is considered to be the most secure Linux operating system out there. It is just a brick. You set Trustix Linux up as long as you do not do anything completely stupid. Nobody can hack in and no viruses can get into it. It is just one solid secure server, but you have to decide that you want a solid and secure server first before you go and get that particular distribution to install on the server. If you install Ubuntu Linux distribution on all your computers and then you decide you need enterprise support and you call Red Hat Linux, they will be not able to help you. Red Hat Linux does not support Ubuntu Linux. Every distribution does things in its own way and is created in different entitles. So you must familiarize yourself with what a particular distribution does and whether it fits your computing requirements exactly. Now coming to open source. So what does open source exactly mean? What open source software means is that whenever a programmer sits down and begin writing the code for a software, they provide you with the code only so that you can see how the program was written. It doesn't necessarily mean it is free. So how do these programs earn with an open source license? There are 4 different ways that these open source vendors or programmers get paid. The first one is through the open source model where they give the software free of charge, but when you require training or support for the software, that is where you have to pay them a certain amount. Let us say for example you downloaded a MySQL software for a Linux server. You download the program, tinkered around it with it for a little bit, and then you find out that is extremely useful and powerful. Even though you already figured out most of the intricacies of the MySQL program, there are still certain aspects of it that you need to learn or need support with. So you go approach the software developer and ask for support and training. This is the point where you have to pay them a certain amount. This is one of the ways these developers or programmers get paid for their development efforts. Now, the second way developers and vendors get paid through an open source license is through a non-commercial, personal use only open source license. This is where most people, including the veteran system administrators, get into a lot of trouble. Some open source licensed software will indeed allow you to obtain a program completely free. You can use them in a computer lab or any kind of experimental environment without having to worry about legal complications. Why? Because it is for personal and non-commercial uses only. Now, the problem or the part that usually gets an administrator, in a mess is as soon as they take that server from the test lab and screw it into a server rack in the production environment, the commercial use starts to kick in. If you're a geek at home and you want to play around with the software, there is no problem at all. Once you use it to power up a business server or maybe host a home business website, for example, you now have a licensing fee for that software. The gruesome thing about that is that these licensing fees can be anywhere between 5,000 rupees and 10,000 rupees. It is that expensive. Therefore, it is only prudent that you be conscious on how you use the software, whether it is for personal, non-commercial or commercial use. Now, the third way open source software programmers or vendors get paid is through a paid open source license. Some of you might be asking, how can a software be on an open source license if it is a paid software right off the bat? Well, a paid software will always be considered as open source if they let you see the code. The idea basically is, if you want the product, you pay the vendor or developer the licensing fee and you buy it, just like if you are dealing with Microsoft, Adobe, etc. The difference with open source software in this model is, even though you bought the software and you can see the code, you may not have the legal right to modify the code. So if you are the type of user who likes to modify code to tailor, fit to a particular software according to your specific needs, you should look out and avoid software that has this type of open source model. Now, the fourth way these open source vendors get paid is through a recurring open source license fee. Again, this is like most open source licenses out there. They let you download and test the software free of charge. They would even let you see the code just so you know how the software actually works. However, in order for you to have legal right to actually use the software, they would have to charge you a yearly fee. This is actually cheaper than a one-time licensing fee, but is expensive nonetheless. But here's an example. Let's say you downloaded a Foxit PDF reader for free. You can use the software, test out its most promising features, and even see the code to figure out how it does what it does. But in order to use the software legally, fully unlock its most useful features and also have technical support for it, you have to pay the developers a yearly recurring fee. So as you can see, knowing how open source licensing works is far more important to your business than simply being able to set up a server. This is the kind of thing that can cause massive amounts of damage to you and your company. If you install multiple servers with open source licensed software and you do not know the licensing requirements, that may be a catastrophic problem. Remember, open source does not mean it is free. It has nothing to do with free. A huge amount of open source only happens to be free. However, that doesn't mean open source software is completely free. What open source means is that you are allowed to see the source code that created the program. This doesn't mean you are allowed to modify the source code. You may not be able to do a single thing to the source code, but at least you are allowed to see the source code so that you understand what is happening. If there are flaws or if there are security holes, you can actually see that in the code. As you can see, Linux can go from being really affordable to being stupidly expensive in an instant, and these maintenance contracts are one of the things that can make it extremely expensive. Open source licensing, as we mentioned, can make or break your career, so make sure you take it seriously. So hope you guys like the video. Please subscribe and share so that more of your friends get to know about these amazing facts about Linux, and explanation and briefly explanation about the Linux operating system. And so I hope you guys like the video again, and if you have any doubt, please feel free to write that in the comments section, and if possible I am going to be answering, but if I say anything wrong, you guys can also correct me in the comments box, because well, I am just like you guys, learning. I am not exactly an expert in these things, so I can make mistakes, and if I make mistakes, please do let me know in the comment section, and I assure you I will correct it.